suddenly the family home, that staircase looks like the north face of the Eiger. The bath has become an ocean, and there are difficulties getting in and out of that. This can be embarrassing. The cost of going into residential care are astronomical. Literally, these costs go through the roof. All those years of saving hard, doing the right thing, can disappear into the ether in very short order.
Hello, Andy.
Hi, Luca.
And welcome to the Carecast. Lovely to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We love speaking to people in the care world and those looking for care or things connected to care to navigate the system and understand what's on offer and what their choices might be. I really appreciate you coming on. Andy, what do you do? Tell us what you and your company does.
So, Design for Independence, I am their business development manager. And there are two sides to our business. The first side is that we work with case managers and litigators on catastrophic injuries. What we will do is work with unfortunate folk who find themselves in this position. We will find them suitable housing, and based on their specific circumstances, we will adapt, modify, build them new accommodation which works best for them, their circumstances, and their future.
So I suppose everything is in the name. Design for Independence perfectly describes the company does.
It does, but what brings all these different elements, these different services, if you will, together is we are led and guided by housing occupational therapists, and they will assess the individual needs of the client. And based on that, that will guide our in-house estate agency team, our building services team, to bespoke the property that we find or any changes that need to be made around that individual. Now, just the second part of our business, Luca, is in later life living. Often as seniors get older, they may find navigating the family home a little more challenging than they did in years gone by. What we can do in circumstances like that is that we can make modifications and alterations to their homes, which are sensitively done so that they can use the family home, stay at home, and walk around and use it securely for the rest of their lives.
So how does your company differ from other adaptation services, would you say, Andy?
We are a one-stop shop. So I mentioned a number of services right from the first assessment of P or the client. And that assessment is done on a clinical basis. So our housing occupational therapists will meet that individual, get to know them, get to know what has happened to them, the challenges that they specifically face, and working with them and the broader family, we will start mapping a means so they can start reimagining their lives in a new home that works most effectively. And all through the different processes, it's so important, whether it's an architectural design, the building, the landscaping, in each of those processes, the feedback, the information that we get from our clients is translated by the experience of the housing occupational therapist. And we will collaborate with other specialists like architects, designers, builders to make sure that the desired outcome for this individual is the actual outcome that's delivered.
Gotcha. What proportion of the effort goes into finding the right place and adapting the place? I suppose it varies massively. You might just find a place which is 100% perfect for someone. Maybe it's already been adapted, arguably. Tell us a bit about that.
That's a great question, because it really hits the point of what is a suitable house accommodation for an individual, and that will vary. So once we have assessed the individual client here, all that information is shared with our in-house estate agency team, and they will be guided to only find accommodation which is most appropriate for that person, for our clients. And that means that the amount of adaptation or modification can be minimized, saving both time and money. In some cases, of course, a best option will be a new build. But what we will never want to do is get involved in a game of grand designs. We want to make sure that on the whole, that the least amount of adaptation in the right location for that individual will be the house that is best for them. And at the end of the day, that individual, of course, will have the call on a number of properties that may fit their requirements.
Obviously, the house is really important, but as they say, occasionally the actual facilities around the house and the neighbourhood and proximity of friends and family must also really be important. So that must be something that you really need to take into account.
Yeah, you bet. Whether schools are required, where are the local amenities, bus services, where are the, as I say, the local shops? What sort of area the family do the individual want to live in? Is it urban? Is it rural? All those different elements are listened to right at the beginning of conversations of where the most appropriate property can be located and found.
Andy, how does occupational therapy play a role in the design process?
It plays a crucial part in the design process, Luca. Once the housing occupational therapist has got to understand the individual needs and requirements of a client, then if we look at the workflow involved in adapting and changing any property, there are a number of different actors who would need to be involved into making all those plans a reality. So in the design, in the build, in the finish, in the interior, in all those different elements, we want to make sure that the specialist architects and builders and interior designers take the individual requirements of our client into account. So the housing occupational therapist, from the beginning of the process right through to the end, is the golden thread, if you will, that brings all these different parts together and will succeed in delivering the anticipated desired outcome with the actual outcome. This is the link that joins everything together, and it's hugely important.
Once a house is delivered or adapted, do you find that sometimes you just need to make adjustments here and there to make the house as adapted as it can be for a client? Is that part of your approach?
It very much is, because we all change over time and people's needs and requirements will reflect that. For example, if we're talking about a very young person who has had a catastrophic injury, that the house will need to adapt and change over time. A playroom may need to become a study room as they go to school. That study room might later in life become a work office. And lots of other elements of the house may need some adaptation as well. So nothing is set in stone. We want to give the fabric of the house chance to breathe, to give that flexibility so further adaptations and changes can be made as the requirements of the individual and their family alter over the course of time. But that's planned from the beginning, because the housing occupational therapist knows these changes are going to take place. In some circumstances, they will be talking to mum and dad about future children coming along. How many more bedrooms do you think that you, and they will have plans that they may have wanted a couple more children. And that sort of design can be added right from the get-go.
What are some of the most common challenges you encounter in designing homes for people with living with disabilities?
I think one of the most challenging aspects is that sometimes, far too often, to be frank, we're called in after a house has been chosen, after specialists have gone in there and done many of the changes and adaptations. And what they find at the end of that process, way, way too often, is actually the house may look fantastic, but it actually doesn't work for that individual. So what is crucial, and we had this conversation with a Boyce Turner, the solicitor, quite recently, and they recommend that all relevant parties should get round the table at the beginning of the process so that they can ensure that the outcomes are as good as they possibly can be. And it's important that collaboration, those conversations, listening to the client to ensure that the delivery is as good as it should be for the client, as appropriate as it should be for that client. All those discussions take place at the beginning. Because if you're making huge adaptations at the end, that takes a lot more time and it costs an awful lot more.
Andy, is there any project in particular that sticks in the mind that you remember?
I've got to be a little bit careful about talking about individual cases, but I will touch on 2 or 3 areas in which sensitivity and the medical training of the team really makes a difference. So firstly, in cases where an individual is in a particular crisis situation, the way that they are struggling to adapt to their new circumstances, the housing occupational therapists have a particular skill. It's a gift. It's all those years of experience of communicating effectively with the client so that they can tell their story, that they can describe their challenges and their frustrations. And the solutions to that can be reflected in the home. So they can really personalize their living areas around the aesthetic requirements of an individual. And that can be interior design, it can be music, it can be lighting, it can be all sorts of elements that make that house work more efficiently for the person. Just the time, for example, that it takes to bathe, having the right wet room in place that
Makes a
would
massive difference.
makes a huge difference, and its design around the individual and their particular needs, so that, for example, the hand basins are fixed. They can move up and down as a younger person grows. So we can lift that over time. It's much more adaptable. Maybe there's a therapy room next door nearer the bedroom. So all these areas are sequential, they're easily accessible, and it makes the house work better for the individual client. I touched on younger clients, and there's a particular skill in being able to engage with them and making sure that their voices are heard. The team are very experienced in this area, and there are countless cases on the building services side as well, where our team have been trained to listen and support those younger folks so they feel like their ideas are being heard and being acted upon. The last area I'd touch on, Luca, which is very challenging, is accidents that happen in the UK, and we repatriate individuals back to their home nations. And for lots of practical and legal reasons, there are plenty of barriers which make that whole workflow process a little more difficult. But through, again, years of experience and listening very closely to our clients and working with partners internationally, we've also been able to do that successfully throughout Europe, North America, and the Caribbean as well.
Amazing. How do you make sure that houses are not only functional, but also beautiful?
That's a good question. Look, nobody wants to live in a hospital ward. Houses are personal. We've got a phrase in this country, don't we? A person's home is their castle. And how that castle is designed and how it looks from the exterior, how it looks internally is super important to them. So it goes back to listening. It goes right back to the start of the process where we will sit down and listen to the aspirations of someone, how they want this house to work for them, how it should look, whether they need certain specific rooms, a therapy room, whether they need additional space for their carers. All of these different elements need to be carefully listened to and analyzed. And the designs that we work on are constantly checked by our client. This is a process that may change over, to some extent, the time of the build. Yeah. And as I said before, having that flexibility, that malleability within the planning, within the structure of the house is hugely beneficial. So the key really is to listen to the clients and get the builders to come in with our housing occupational therapists, get our interior designers to come in and work with the client so they can choose what the kitchen looks like, what the surfaces look like, what the textures feel like as well. So we go right down to a very detailed level. So every aspect of their home is as they wanted it to be.
Yep. How does the getting to know the client process work? Is it a series of meetings that you might have with the client?
Yes, it is a series of meetings, but the reason that we get so much crucial personal data about the needs of our clients really is because they trust the medical experience and background, again, of the housing occupational therapists. If you just imagine for a second, a lot of the things that have to be discussed are intimate, they're personal, often our pride, our dignity make those conversations very difficult. When you're going to the doctor, it becomes very simple, doesn't it? You meet a medical person and suddenly you feel free to talk about all the things that have been worrying you. It is less likely that you would have those detailed conversations with an architect or a builder or anyone else in that chain, however sensitive they are. And they are very sensitive, but it's the particular skill of our medically trained staff that allow that bond of trust to develop and those very personal discussions to take place and plans to be made how those issues and those challenges will be dealt with successfully.
What are some of the key considerations when designing a home for someone who needs a living carer or maybe even more than one living carer?
This comes down to an assessment. It comes down to that honest conversation about how someone is going to approach and navigate the rest of their lives. And the care, those that provide care are a big part of this chain of support. Getting the right care in, having them positioned in the right place in the house so that they are there, that they are easily attainable for the client, but the client still feels that home is their own and they have their own privacy. Getting that balance right is a very delicate process, and we work very hard with the clients to make sure we get that balance right and with those that provide care for the clients as well. And it's an ongoing conversation. It is a collaboration. We listen to how that relationship develops once we have handed the keys over to a client. And sometimes it's work in process that needs to be perhaps tweaked again and recalibrated. But as long as the communication is strong and open and honest, then any tweaks can be made. And if clients' needs alter over time, then their care requirements will also alter over time. And we're there to help with that process.
But some of the emerging trends in home adaptation industry, what I'm imagining that computer-aided design and sort of visualization of the eventual outcome of the process might be something that is really useful. I'm personally changing a bathroom, and it's hard to imagine the new tiles and the new this and the new that. What's it going to look like once you've done it? And wouldn't it be great to just be able to put a headset on and do an imaginary walkthrough what it's going to look like? But yeah,
It's good. It's a broad and interesting question. We're just taking a step back. What are the issues, even with new technologies that we have? One of the big risks that often comes out is design risk when we're looking at the construction space. So it's so important that the relevant data is fed into the architects. And technology does allow us to change, to alter those designs and illustrate them virtually for our clients, working with our peers and partners who are architects. So I think a combination of old-fashioned discussion, collaboration, good communication, but feeding that into the new technologies, again, will reduce the risk of misdesign and a house that isn't fit for purpose. And it helps at an earlier stage for the client to imagine, to see how the discussion, the reality would appear from a virtual perspective. And that's the first point the client could go, actually, perhaps that's not what I quite intended. So it's a very useful aid in mapping what was intended to help us make sure that we deliver what is actually wanted and desired.
what are some of the biggest challenges facing the home adaptation industry today?
I think this question is interesting from a data perspective. How are the choices made of which service providers to choose? I think it's important that there's lots of different service providers out there. And in order that the decision makers can see clearly who provides the best value for money, who delivers the best outcome for their clients on time, regularly, then the decision makers, solicitors and case managers really could benefit by having much more rich quantitative data, performance data, where they could compare and contrast different service providers, measure their performance over time and cost. And based on that data, which would grow over time, I'm sure they'd be able to make better decisions on who are the best providers of certain services in terms of a meritocratic system that would just help.
Yep. What tips would you give to someone who is put in a position where maybe their mums or dads might be coming to the point where some home adaptation is needed? Or what are some of the key things that they really need to be thinking about?
Yeah, this often comes down to dignity and pride. Seniors sometimes find it difficult to have those conversations. They're fearful and anxious that the solution is, oh, we'll have to become institutionalized, we'll have to go into residential care. Actually, what they need to do is have these conversations with their nearest, their dearest, and ask for advice on what the best solutions for them are. Suddenly, the family home, that staircase looks like the north face of the Eiger. The bath has become an ocean, and there are difficulties getting in and out of that. This can be embarrassing. But people may get very detailed plans for the end of their lives and inheritance. These conversations, I think, are better had out in the open. And with the sensitivity of our housing occupational therapists, again, we can help in that process. And it's really understanding, sometimes, Luca, it's tweaks and changes. We're talking about widening doors. If moving around becomes an issue and mum and dad, grandma, grandpa are now starting to use wheelchairs, it's making a few changes around the house that can be done reasonably simply. Perhaps it's a chairlift. Perhaps they need a wet room. But all these changes can be done sensitively and with their oversight and input. That's so important. Nobody wants to turn a home into a hospital environment. All the changes are done to maintain the style that people have developed over time in their own homes. And that's what we always aim to do.
Andy, tell me, what do you understand about the difference between remaining in your own home for older people and perhaps getting adaptations done as they're needed over time and someone's functionality and their abilities change in comparison to moving to a care home? What are some of the key comparisons?
Yeah, the benefits are pretty clear. Firstly, it gives and it maintains for seniors their autonomy, looking after themselves, looking after their financial interests, staying in their own homes with all those family memories around them. And from a longevity point of view, huge benefits as well, that they can just stay in their own homes for the rest of their lives. From a financial perspective as well, there are clear benefits. The cost of going into residential care are astronomical. Literally, these costs go through the roof. All those years of saving hard, doing the right thing can disappear into the ether in very short order. But with a few careful changes, a few adaptations to make the home more navigable for these seniors, then all those obstacles, those challenges are no longer there. And home remains what it's always been, safe and secure. A place where, the younger members of the family can still come round, visit grandma and granddad. And that sense of well-being has huge benefits for all the individuals, particularly the seniors and their broader family. So it's something that needs to be, I think, better understood. And those are certainly the sort of conversations that we at Design for Independence are increasingly having with seniors, how we can make their homes more safe and secure, looking out into the future.
Thanks, Andy. Some really good points there. Appreciate it. Andy, tell, if you would, our listeners how they would get in touch with Design for Independence to discuss home adaptations.
www.designforindependence.co.uk. You can see all our details on there. And it's good to have, as I said, throughout this discussion with Luca, it's good to have an early conversation, whether this is in terms of a catastrophic injury or whether it's later life living. Having that first conversation, having that first consultation, getting that anxiety off your chest is so important. And then all the possibilities, the solutions that can deliver the best outcomes to those individuals can start to be discussed.
Thank you. It's been brilliant talking to you, Andy. Really appreciate it. I'm very informative. I've learned a lot today, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thanks for having me.
Take care.